What a day. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time we are again going as warrior and, well, this time I had a very different duty distribution. Previous sessions I've done either on Wednesday afternoons mainly or on a Monday evening. This time I went on a Tuesday afternoon, meaning on weekly reset day. Whether that makes a difference or not, I certainly had a different experience. In fact, this time I only got through 7 duties. However, look at this distribution. For duty 1, we landed straight back in Ramuh Extreme again as a 14-minute replacement. It even turned out they hadn't even pulled the boss yet by this point. Fortunately, both tanks, at least one of the healers, and about half the DPS at least, knew what to do in this fight. In fact, we made use of markers to make the fight a bit more structured. Main tank stands on B to the north, making it easier to know where it is safe to be or not. Second, when you get the debuff indicating you will get horrified, you stand on A. This makes it a lot easier to strike all horrified players at once with one blue circle. Again, making things safer and more structured. Despite this additional structure, we had a very unfortunate sequence of events where both healers got horrified at the worst possible time, leading to a full party wipe almost instantly. After the first wipe, I elaborated on the mechanics I felt people got hit by, the donut AoE in the water after the blue circles, and the way to deal with tethers. Under most circumstances, the best you can do with a tether is do nothing unnecessary until it is dealt with, but healers specifically may need to cast heals. For the second pull, we have some trouble keeping the samurais alive, and then I get hit with the Horrify, and by the time I realize, A is too far away for me to make it. Fortunately, I am still helped out. I also end up with the static condensation debuff immediately after my Reska got their buff up, so we have an extremely strict time frame to fix this. As it is my mistake, and my Reska's buff will run out first, I take the field with the potential risk of dying. One way to resolve this would also be to simply grab an additional orb for either of us to extend our buff so they don't run out at the same time, but here we are. And we got the tank switch perfectly, so no one died as a result of that specifically. After this, we finish up the fight with no more major issues. Something I noticed about this fight is also that I feel, unlike a lot of other boss fight themes, Ramuh's is very thoughtful and more technical in a way, like the theme of a quote-unquote boss fight in a puzzle game of some sort. I feel this matches perfectly with how technical the fight is. It is a lot about carefully aligning each other so we don't overlap blue circles, dealing with the sudden horrifies, juggling tank switches while collecting orbs at just the right moment. There's a lot of technique here that matches well with this theme. For duty 2, we went to Titan Extreme, and this time we get one of those go tanks, if you catch my drift. Let me put it like this, the tank pulled immediately, despite us needing a replacement, and each wipe, they essentially just went again immediately. On the plus side, despite no words being exchanged really, it seems for the most part we progress on each attempt. I've never done Titan Extreme synced before myself, so I had to learn some of these things on the fly too. I immediately recognized that Titan applied a stacking debuff that would need tank swapping to not get overwhelming. I also noticed that you could easily deal with this by swapping on 2 stacks. So, when my co-tank reached 2 stacks, I would take over. The thing that really confused me about this is that on the second pull, they did the same thing for me, but on the third pull, they didn't do anything about it until I asked them to provoke. Here's a tip for everyone. If anyone starts calling for a provoke, a healer, a DPS, or a tank, it usually means it is long overdue. With that said, most of the mechanics of the fight are familiar from the hard version, but there are of course differences. For example, he uses Upheaval, which is a somewhat heavy knockback considering how small the arena is. His landslides also seem to get more and more lines as the fight progresses. Jails also seem to give much less time to deal with them, and given how Titan tends to align his knockback or a landslide with the jails, it can get really scary to resolve them, since maybe the person gets saved only to get dunked off the arena entirely. The final phase is also quite different, as Titan summons 2 adds that, when killed, drops what appears to be permanent circle AoEs on the floor, which I resolved by pulling them all the way to a corner. in regards to the bomb boulders that drop gradually. A trick I learned from watching very old clears of this duty, like A Realm Reborn old, is that the tank can easily survive one of the explosions, and sometimes staying in the corner is more valuable for the raid as a whole, as it removes the potential risk of Titan doing a tank buster cleave right as you turn him to get to safety. Finally, right as the duty is finishing up, we get a mechanic where all 7 bombs drop at the same time, which means we would have to break one to find a safe spot. However, once again, everyone can survive one bomb, so if we just shuffled into a corner, it might have been fine. The funny thing is that because Titan isn't even on the field for this mechanic, we would have no reason to not attack a bomb boulder. Meaning the real problem was that we had no strategy on which one to focus. Despite this, Titan was near death, so we could just brute force the last bit. For duty 3, we got the Praetorium. Extreme. Nah, I'm just kidding, but could you imagine though? What would the extreme part be about it? Even longer cutscenes? Or truly challenging bosses and no cutscenes? It could be interesting, I suppose. With that said, nothing special really happened here, aside from the fact that the healer knew me. Hello there. For duty 4, we went to Garuda Extreme, another one that I have never done synced before. Once again, we have a go-go-go tank, and not only was it a go-go-go tank, but when things went wrong, potentially because of them, they were extremely fast to blame others. 2 tips for everyone, especially the sprout queuing for extremes. While it would be preferable if you get into extremes by making use of the party finder instead of the duty finder, it is fine that you do the duty finder then. Free trials would find it difficult to make a party finder group after all. However, and this is tip number 1, please don't just pull. Check with the group whether there are any mechanics you need to talk over. I don't care whether you are ready, someone else might not be. It is a miracle if go 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 just works. Tip number 2. It helps no one to go, "Where were my heals?" when you die. There's probably an explanation somewhere, and you blaming someone else just in general just makes you the bad guy immediately. Anyway, as a result of us not getting a chance to talk about anything, our first wipe comes from the fact that I wasn't sure if we actually needed to split the ads. We did. Then, before Maev here actually has a proper chance to explain, Sok just goes for it again. And clearly, they didn't quite understand the importance of moving into position, since they were trying to gradually move them into position instead of simply using shield lob and going for it. They also didn't seem to understand that the A mark was very specific and not a general direction, even though we did say specifically A. We wipe again, and I try to explain, and Sok goes for it again. This time at least, we make it to the spiny plume, and again, given that I don't know this fight, we end up breaking it to see what happens. A wind barrier. I walk in, check the buff. Huh, wind resistance. Nice. That is probably important given we no longer have rocks to hide behind. We make it to the ad phase again, and the spiny plume spawns on me and suddenly breaks. I recognize we probably need to safeguard it, but let's just say this becomes a trial in and of itself. As the massive tornadoes come down, a bunch of players get killed immediately, and well, at that point we already lost. We almost kill Garuda in time, but hey, if only we had a wind resistance barrier, right? I sure wonder where we would find one of those. This time I immediately tell Sok to not pull, and at least he read that much. We spent some time specifically talking about the spiny plume, this is important, and a kind of foreshadowing. By the way, all of the DPS in the group appear to be French, so I don't actually know if they are reading the chat or understand. Once we're done talking, we do a ready check, and then Sok is told they can pull. Once again, we are met with the fact that Sok didn't quite grasp the significance of moving Sopana to the marker is much greater than whether he does that with Riot Blade or Shield Lob. And while I explain to him how to do this, he goes for it. I can't begin to explain how, if we had just taken sufficient time to talk before we pulled, we could probably had gotten this down in like 3 pulls. But because we have players that are just going for it like this and don't seem to really take in what is being said, it takes way longer. Now, this next pull, I grab the spiny plume and intentionally pull it away to a corner, and then I see our bard just going, target acquired, and focus it. I tried to tell them no, but too late. On the off chance they're not reading chat, in my desperation, I tried putting an ignore marker on them momentarily to try and show them like, no, no, wrong, don't do that. Fortunately, the first spiny plume doesn't seem to be mandatory. Once the tornadoes come down, we end up wiping again. And we call for another stop pulling situation to try and explain this spiny plume thing. Again, in my desperation, I even tried to explain with the help of Google Translate, the spiny plume thing. This attempt, I once again put an ignore marker on the spiny plume. Guess who's ready with their arrows again? I called them out by name, and apparently that seemed to possibly work. As it turns out, they finally let it be after that. However, just in case they changed their mind, I moved the plume all the way to Narnia, so they maybe would have to actively chase it down if they suddenly had a change of heart. Fortunately, because we somehow had less deaths in general this time, we defeated Garuda before we needed the plume. The worst part about beating an extreme in this way, where it feels like over half of the group thinks they can just brute force it, they can't, and they just want to get away, is that once you beat it, it feels like a relief more than a success. Note how when we somehow defeated sort of an extreme, it was a triumphant success. When we defeated Shiva Extreme after a lot of hardship, it was a triumphant success. But when we defeat Garuda Extreme after hardship, it is just... okay. Because due to how the group was playing, most of the group didn't feel like they were actually part of the group. They were just bystanders waiting for things to function, hence why they didn't seem to pay that much attention to the mechanics. Also, just in case you didn't notice yourself, I want to highlight the single target dot on Ninja. For Duty 5, we land in Thornmarch Extreme as a 39-minute replacement. Now, I have a vague understanding of how this duty goes, but initially I had completely forgotten that Old Heart and Extreme are different. The other tank quickly got me back on track and told me which Moogle to tank. Given they had been at this for 39 minutes, I assumed they would share any information that was needed for me to know, and beyond that, I would simply figure it out. No time to explain everything from the start again. For those that don't know, the way the fight works is that first, King Mugglemog, praise be his fluffiness, will be alone. When he reaches 90%, he will become invulnerable and summon the Morg's Guard. When a single Morg's Guard dies, the king, praise be, will fully heal all of the Morg's Guard, including the dead ones, using his own HP in some capacity. He will do this twice, and after the second time, he will use Moogle Meteor and then start to cast Memento Moogle with a really long cast, which is a hard enrage. The Moogle Meteor is not lethal, but Memento Moogle is. This means that after he has healed the Morg's Guard twice, the third time you just have to rush down every single one and then kill the king, praise be, before it is too late. This means that if you messed up in the first two sections, you will lose by default. In fact, failing to properly utilize one of the heal-ups will almost certainly lead to a loss. This fight is then approached by carefully whittling down each Morg's Guard to around 10% HP and then attempting to kill them all in a burst, or at least as many as you can. This will leave the king, praise be, with so little HP that you don't have to do that much damage to him during the final rush. Now, something worth considering that never came up in this run was the way the Morg's Guard's mechanics work. Apparently, the bard announces what mechanic is coming up in some way, but the main deal is that many of the mechanics you can react to. There's one that resets the aggro on the Paladin and Warrior Moogles. The Paladin and Warrior Moogles, by the way, apply debuffs that make the other hurt like wow, so you need the tanks to split these. The mechanic that ultimately led to our demise on our final attempt was a mechanic where the White Mage Moogle starts casting Pom Holy. Interestingly, the Black Mage Moogle has Pom Flare, which has a similar effect. Both of these are essentially casts that are interrupted by hitting that particular Moogle 5 times. This might not sound like a big deal, since anyone can do that in that cast time with relative ease, especially with 8 players on the field. The problem arises when you have a White Mage Moogle with around 1/3 HP left, and everyone's too careful to attack because they don't know if everyone else will as well, because we had no coordination on this. So we simply just don't and promptly wipe. Weirdly, this has not been an issue with the Black Mage Moogle throughout. At least, if it happened, it was usually accompanied by something else wiping us anyway. The saddest part of it all is that on one attempt, the king, praise be, had 17% HP in the final phase, but we were too slow to reach him. And in a different attempt, where he had a whopping 33%, we easily managed to do 20% of his HP in damage. If those two attempts had overlapped, we would have done it. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Actually, scratch that, what I think was actually the saddest part is that in the final attempt, someone actually asked if it was time to focus down and kill all the Moogles in the second round. After this long. So I'm genuinely curious if they just randomly guessed on every single attempt in the duty. As I said, we did not succeed and ended up abandoning when we had too little time left to do an additional pull fully. For duty 6, we went to P5N, Proto-Carbuncle from Abyssos, the 5th circle. There isn't really anything major here. I'm almost confident you could solo this fight in some capacity. However, I do find it a bit amusing that so many people got hit by Devour. If you have done this fight and been a bit confused by that mechanic, let me explain how it kills you, and then how it works. When you get hit by the Devour stomps, you're marked for death. When all the stomps are over, the Carby will simply go and kill you afterwards. I'm not sure why they designed it like this, but they did. There's nothing you can do once you're hit, you will die. How to deal with it? On normal, take note of where the first marker is, where he will stomp first. Then take note of which way it goes, clockwise or counterclockwise. Then place yourself on the 4th marker in the order, and be careful to not be too close to the first. Once he stomps the first marker, sprint and move into the first marker and off to the corner, so you don't get hit by the 5th marker. That's it really. For duty 7, we finish with Ghimlyt Dark. This one went perfectly fine. I noticed at the start of the dungeon, the Dragoon didn't use Dragon Sight on the Black Mage, but actually, that seems to have been the only time that happened, and the rest of the dungeon, they did it right. I sometimes watch for this, because it is a surprisingly common mistake, but it isn't a major one. And I have heard a lot of players find it difficult to target someone else for it. I also noticed that the White Mage decided to use Medica 1, Swiftcast Medica 1 at a point during the final boss, which is really weird honestly. I mean, it worked, but just really weird. I decided to not comment on it since the rest of the duty went so well. Now, I don't know if it was just random luck or bad luck depending on who you ask, but I got 4 extremes on a Tuesday afternoon, where normally I get like 0 or 1 most of the time. Perhaps there is a correlation. I have previously ran into players that queue for the extremes on their Wondrous Tales journal. Just announcing this one for any sprouts that don't know. You don't have to do these synced. If you can get a friend to help you, they can rush you through these very easily unsynced, whether it is for the mounts, the gear, or the Wondrous Tales clear. However, that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to queue for them. The reason I thought of this is because I myself had Ramuh Extreme and Titan Extreme on my Wondrous Tales journal, and both Garuda Extreme and Thornmarch Extreme could easily have been on others. I might try this more in the future as well, of queuing specifically Tuesday mornings and afternoons to see if there's a heavier emphasis on extremes at that time. I would love to hear if you have seen anything similar in the comments. Also, let's not forget that the influx of new Xbox players also could mean a bigger concentration of sprouts that might queue for this at this time, so if your data is months old, there could be a difference due to this new observation. Possibly. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, Thornmarch Heart has been reworked. In the new version, you fight King Mugglemog, praise be his fluffiness, with the Mogsguard functioning more as boss mechanics that he summons in. In the old version, each Mogsguard was dangerous in their own right, and so you had a kill priority. You had to kill each one, then the king, praise be, would spawn, and all Mogsguard would fully heal. Then, if you hurt the king too much, he would skip to Memento Moogle and wipe the raid, meaning you had to actively avoid hurting him, which was often a problem with first-timers that ignored the chat. And while that went on, you often had a kill priority to get the more dangerous Moogles, like the Black Mage, off the field quicker.